Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here today for our adult forum. Things are going to be a little different than a normal adult forum, just in that we'll be sharing some food. We're talking about food, so I thought it only fitting that we eat together. So you'll find out more about that in a few minutes. But if you're wondering why Pastor Mike is passing around butter and knives, that is why. I am intern pastor Katie Weiland, and I'm delighted to talk about food with you all this morning. I based this presentation on one of my elective courses from seminary that I took last fall. It was got to be in my top 5 classes that I took at seminary, taught by one of my favorite professors, Dr. Anna Marsh. I'll do my very best to highlight and condense my learning to our hour here this morning, but just know that we are barely scraping the surface of a huge topic of study. And at the end of the presentation, I have a few book recommendations. If this is interesting to you, I've got the picture of the cover of the book so you can know what it looks like and search it up online if you want to learn more. So before we dive into scripture and the biblical implications and importance of food, I would just like to lay a groundwork for some basic food studies. Food, as we all know, is central to our lives. Brazilian physician and nutritionist José de Castro is quoted saying, "The history of man from the beginning has been the history of his struggle for daily bread." Terry Eagleton, an English literary theorist, wrote in her article Edible Écriture, "One thing is for certain, food is never just food." Her argument here was that we need to live, but we need to eat to live, but we also live to eat. And not just food, but other things, creative activities, writing and laughing and singing. Therefore, food includes anything we ingest for nourishment, but also for pleasure. The study of food then requires us to be interdisciplinary. All these different pieces of our identity are shaped by food. If we take gender, for example, we could ask questions like, who is the hunter versus who is the gatherer? Who prepares the food versus who serves it? Who plans meals? Who eats first? Who suffers the most if there is a famine? Who refuses or restricts food and why? What are children taught about food as they grow? And who teaches them? Are there masculine foods or feminine foods? These are all questions that we could have simply for the gender category. And all of these categories have a number of questions. I'm going to highlight a few for each of these different areas to get us thinking about food. For economy, we could study when food is given as a gift and what is given. When is food treated as a commodity and who profits from the production of food? How are food dollars spent? For politics, we could ask, is there access to food in a given context? And is that food healthy? Do people growing the food have the same access to the food that they are exporting? How does our food access depend on political or climate-related changes in other countries? How do geopolitical factors like sanctions, war, and trade policy affect access to food in local contexts? What is food relief, and how is that provided? How does food safety, scarcity, or insecurity affect political engagement? For religion, we can dive into the role that food plays in ritual, the symbolic control of food in those cases, what foods are disallowed and why. Does food need to be prepared in a specific way according to religious law? And how religious groups care for the hungry around them. For family, we might ask, who gets to make the food in your childhood home? What are some of your strongest food memories? Be thinking about this one. You'll talk about it later. What are food-related traditions you have inherited and passed on? How does your family decide what to eat? And who does the food shopping? Who does the cooking? What patterns in your home are the same as your natal family, and what is different and why? For identity, we can look into which cultural groups does food and eating connect to, and how do we conform to food norms? How do we deviate from them? How do these norms make you feel comfortable or feel tension? And how do you adopt new food practices? And finally, for social class, we can ask about what food different classes eat, what behaviors are acceptable around the table, which food or drinks signify luxury, which food or drinks signify poverty, what is valued among food among different classes. For example, do I care about being healthy, sustainably grown, locally sourced, or do I care about what is available, affordable, and keeps me full for a long time? And then what about flavor? What does the market I shop at say about my food dollars, my food politics, and my access to food? All this to say, there are so many things we can talk about when we're talking about food. Probably, perhaps more than you ever thought imaginable. I knew when I took this class, I was shocked by the never-ending discussions we had. So all this to say that to procure, prepare, share, or abstain from, or enjoy food in any amount or in any quality is to interact with one or more of these categories that I just outlined. To help us explore these categories more and get us thinking about food and how it relates to our traditions, beliefs, and lives, I want us to share some food memories. So I will start, and then we'll have some discussion at our small groups. But my food tradition is what I'm brought to share with you all today. It is my great-grandma Loretta's Swedish rye bread recipe. This is a beloved family recipe from my dad's side of the family, which has integrated its way into my immediate family and something we share in our household and beyond. Loretta Ekstrom was the mother of my grandmother, Marilyn, who's pictured here. She got to be St. Lucia at her church last year, which was wonderful. And her parents emigrated to the United States from Sweden. Loretta was a cook for the elementary school across the street from her house for her whole life. And back in that day when the school cooks actually cooked the meal, it wasn't just reheated in the oven, she cooked. She was very secretive about her rye bread recipe, though. So much so, she didn't even give it to her own daughter, Marilyn, because Marilyn is not the biggest cook in the family, but she did trust it to my mother, who is big into baking, and gave her the handwritten recipe card, which my mom still has in her little, what do you call that? Recipe box. Yes, recipe box full of recipes. Yeah, with the handwritten ones. Yes. And that original recipe is big enough for 9 large loaves. I'll tell you, Mom and I made 4 loaves on Friday, and then she made 4 loaves again yesterday. And every loaf comes out a little bit different. So we are no masters, but we try. And we have a bread machine too. Grandma would knead it herself, and we have the machine, and it still is not uniform, but it's good. Great-grandma Loretta would break this bread weekly and would often share it with friends and neighbors. Now it is something that we traditionally have just around the holidays for Christmas, and we make a batch for a special occasion here or there. In true Loretta fashion, we love sharing the bread with others, and it's often a Christmas gift for people, for our friends and family. So for a few minutes here, I'd invite you to dive in, eat some of this bread, and share stories around your table about a food memory or food tradition that you hold in your family. How did that tradition start? Why is it significant? And who is passing that tradition on? Enjoy your bread and stories, and we'll be back in a few minutes. Thank you, everyone, for sharing your stories. Thank you. Thank my mom. So, I think one of my favorite parts of taking this food and justice course is that we never ran out of things to talk about. Maybe you discovered that at your table. If you ever are stuck for conversation with some strangers, just talk about food. You won't run out of things to talk about. So, whether you've realized it or not, food is everywhere in the Bible. We're going to shift now to be thinking about food a little more theologically. In fact, on every 3 pages of the NRSV, people mentioned in the Old Testament eat or drink 4 times, whereas in the New Testament, people eat or drink twice. So especially in the Old Testament, they are talking about food a lot. Ancient Israel was a farming society, and that definitely impacted how they thought about food. An agrarian worldview knows that the health of the land is the health of the community, and we can see this in Scripture, and we'll be diving into some Scripture soon. The agrarian culture can be seen in the rhythms and the festivals and daily life of the ancient Israelites. When we're looking for food in the Bible, there are several places that we can turn. The narratives include miracles and dreams, the ritual texts, prayer and praise, talk of the land, cultural attitudes, and parables. Religion professor at Villanova University, Carrie Ellen Walsh, writes that the biblical portrayal of the Israelite life is a complex nexus of theological and cultural ideologies interwoven with mundane features like food and drink. Or as Robert Carroll puts it, matters of and images of food are almost too commonplace to be noteworthy, but they are among the most frequently alluded to because biblical literature is made up of the commonplace, of images arising from the mundane. All this to say, we are the very cliche, we are what we eat. But, as archaeologist Catherine Twist says, we are also where we eat, how we eat, and with whom we eat. Eating is therefore already and always engaging in life together, and there's no life apart from life together. There are several ways for us to think theologically about food, and one model, I'm only going to dive into one model this morning, and that comes from the work of Professor of Old Testament at Stellenbosch University, Juliana Claessens. And in her work, Claessens explores food as a divine gift for us from God. So that is the model we're going to look at today. A God who provides. There are many metaphors used for God throughout the Bible. We use all sorts of imagery to describe God. In the biblical tradition, we see both male and female animate and inanimate images used to describe God, including God who is said to be a rock, or a leopard, a bear, an eagle, a potter, a builder, farmer, midwife, woman in labor, king, husband, father, shepherd, and warrior. These multitude of images suggest the recognition of the biblical authors that no one image could perfectly encapsulate the I am who I am. Claessens' book, The God Who Provides, looks specifically at the metaphor of a God who feeds. She argues that the metaphor of a God who feeds is one such metaphor that has power to lure us into the world it imagines and to shape the way we view God and life in the world. I am going to read the narrative from Exodus 16 of manna in the wilderness for us all. I'm not going to read all of chapter 16, but I will read most of it. And as I read this text, be mindful of those questions that I outlined earlier on that slide with the different interdisciplinary areas that we can study food: gender, politics, religion, family. Be thinking of those things as you hear this text, and just pay attention to what you notice. We'll have a little large group discussion about things that you notice in this text, and then I will share with you what Claessens writes about it. So, Exodus 16. The whole congregation of the Israelites complained against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. The Israelites said to them, "If only we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the pots of meat and ate our fill of bread, for you have brought us out into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger." Then the Lord said to Moses, "I am going to rain bread from heaven for you, and each day the people shall go out and gather enough for the day. In that way I will test them, whether they will follow my instruction or not. On the 6th day, when they prepare what they bring in, it will be twice as much as they gathered on other days." So Moses and Aaron said to the Israelites, "In the evening you shall know what it is the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt. And in the morning you shall see the glory of the Lord, because he has heard your complaining against the Lord. For what are we that you complain against us?" And Moses said, "When the Lord gives you meat to eat in the evening and your fill of bread in the morning, because the Lord has heard the complaining that you utter against him, what are we? Your complaining is not against us, but against the Lord." In the evening, quails came up and covered the camp, and in the morning there was a layer of dew around the camp. When the layer of dew lifted, there on the surface of the wilderness was a fine, flaky substance, as fine as frost on the ground. When the Israelites saw it, they said to one another, "What is it?" For they did not know what it was. Moses said to them, "It is the bread that the Lord has given you to eat. This is what the Lord has commanded. Gather as much as you need, an omer per person according to the number of persons, all providing for those in their own tents." The Israelites did so, some gathering more, some less. But when they measured it with an omer, those who gathered much had nothing over, and those who gathered little had no shortage. They gathered as much as each of them needed. And Moses said to them, "Let no one leave any of it over until morning." But they did not listen to Moses. Some left part of it until morning, and it became wormy and rotten. And Moses was angry with them. Morning by morning they gathered it, as much as each needed, but when the sun grew hot, it melted. So, does anyone want to venture out and share something they noticed relating to any of those categories from that reading, something we could tie in?
The connection between remembering what God has done and what God provides in the present. And I shared marrying into a Scandinavian family. You know, we do all the holiday things that we don't normally eat during any other time of the year, Lefse, Lutefisk, you know, all of that sort of thing. But it's not just about the food, it is also about remembering the people and the past. And in our family, there's some theology there as well, you know, that God provided in scarce times, and we remember that when we gather and have these strange foods.
Absolutely.
I think the lesson of the economy, of not taking too much and not leaving some behind, it was a big testing ground for the people of Israel. Are you going to listen to what we're having to say? It's pretty important if you don't. That's where I saw the economy kind of.
Absolutely. And this continues on this narrative in Exodus and then also comes back in the book of Numbers. And the people are grumbling again, and God sends them quail, and God sends too much quail. And there's quail coming out of their ears, you know, and, you know, that's a problem too. When is abundance overabundance? Or the people who gather too much and save it and it becomes wormy and it's not good to eat anymore. Awesome. Yes, Marlon.
In today's history, we read about all the people that are starving in various parts of our world. And we also read in the Bible that God will provide. It's kind of tough for me to figure that out.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and especially in a story like this where God is providing and there's equity among all the people, even if people are hoarding the food, God doesn't let that happen. So how does that fall upon us to make sure that our wealth is equally distributed as best that we can so that we are caring for the poor in our community who need our help and assistance, and especially a time like now? Colleen.
There's a Christian song, and the lyrics are such that this person is asking God, we'll use hunger as an example, but all the other inequitable things that happen in the world. Why do you allow this? Why aren't you addressing this? I don't understand. And God replies, I am addressing it. I created you.
Yes, that's beautiful. Yeah, so it is up to us. I will put some of our friends from the social justice team up here on the spot later to talk about what we are going to be doing this month of November as we push towards our Thanksgiving worship service, and how we will be collecting funds and collecting food throughout this month, and then especially on that day for the ACBC food shelf. I'm going to talk a little bit about Clausen's work here in The God Who Provides. This is her book. Manna in this narrative and in later interpretations is the essential symbol of God's providence. God's provision of food to Israel is quite significant for Israel's understanding of their relationship with God. Throughout the centuries, God's gracious gift to Israel has captured interpreters and the imaginations of others. One of the more intriguing moves that the rabbis who introduced the creative imagery to describe manna and its significance linked the manna imagery to the imagery of a nursing mother. Thinking of a mother nursing her baby provided a fitting description of God's complete care in the wilderness, expressing the fullness of life people experienced during this time. The experience of life in the wilderness with only God to rely on for food and security is very fitting, and like that of a mother nursing her babe. God's provision of food is always there and always enough, just like a mom with her baby. As the caring mother in Exodus 16, then, is one who makes certain that her children are fed every day. God hears the cry of the people in the wilderness, and God provides. This miracle also makes another profound theological claim, as we brought up with the economy, that there's equal distribution of the manna for everyone. And God doesn't make any distinction between poor and rich, or the weak people and the strong. God is equally interested in each member of the community. This is just, by the way, this is like chapter 1 of the book, and this is really like half of chapter 1 of the book. So there's so much more that she writes about, and paying attention to that metaphor of God who feeds. It's really, I would recommend it to anyone and everyone. Another great read that I'd like to lift up for you today comes from Ellen Davis. She's a professor of Bible and practical theology at Duke Divinity School and is the author of 12 books and many articles that have been formative to me through my seminary journey. Today, I'm sharing her work, Scripture, Culture, and Agriculture, an agrarian reading of the Bible. This book integrates biblical studies with a critique of industrial agriculture and food production. I think that this work is great because of the way that she is able to talk about and show how food is a sign of the covenant God has with us. This is highlighted in a quote that I pulled here from the book. The most obvious thing that commends Leviticus for an agrarian reading is its deep interest in how Israelites eat. Nowhere else in the Bible is it so clear that the writers, like the contemporary agrarians, recognize eating as the definitive cultural act. Food is a primary communicator of the covenant. Another great read is Food and Faith by Norman Wurzba. Wurzba explores several theological approaches to food, including a Trinitarian model of eating, thinking of the body as host, and eating, which equals life, and then therefore death. So really circle of life kind of imagery. A sentiment that is tied into the highlight here from the book. Eating is no idle or trifling activity. It is the means of life itself, but also death. For any creature to live, countless seen and unseen others must die, often by being eaten themselves. Life as we know it depends on death, needs death. which means that death is not simply the cessation of life, but its precondition. Death is eating's steadfast accomplice. So if those are interesting to you, or if you want more ideas, you can come see me. Thank you for being here. Also, just a little pitch. We are going to be doing something different for Lent this year. We are going to be having a dinner church model for our Lenten worship services, both at noon and in the evening. So instead of gathering in the sanctuary to worship together, we will gather down here and worship at these tables with a soup supper and conversation. It'll be a little different, than traditional pastor up here preaching. We sing songs. There will still be songs. There will still be maybe a message, but there will be conversation and time to engage together around the table for a different sense of community and worship. So stay tuned for that. And would someone from social justice want to talk? Otherwise, I can just say.
Amy's here.
Okay, yes, thank you, Amy Norquist. Do you want to just, yeah.
So I think in the past we've done the food drive at Thanksgiving, and there's greater need currently. We've heard through Pastor Connie and other, there's kind of a coalition of churches that of all different churches that they have get together. I'm forgetting, is it the Isaiah group?
Yeah.
Yeah, Isaiah group, okay. And so they have identified there's a greater need. So I think that they've talked with food shelves and I think ACBC, and they're gonna need, I think they're quite behind, so they might need 3 times the food now because the food shelf there's gonna be greater need. So I think we're trying to make a goal where we can maybe triple the amount of food for the month of November. Yes, just to help with the need in the community. So, and I think there'll be more information coming. We just found out just a couple of weeks ago of that. So, and I think it's with the maybe SNAP being cut that there's going to be greater need. So,
Food and monetary.
That's exciting. For me, who I was trying to figure out how to help. This is the way to help.
Yeah, so both food, Pastor Connie was saying, food and monetary donations. I know, or I've heard that they say the dollar can't stretch as far as it had in the past, but it is still very beneficial to them to have monetary donations as well as the non-perishable foods. And if you're interested in a list of what kinds of foods they would recommend, the ACBC website has a good list available that's pretty easy to find. And then also stuff like paper products and sanitary products are always needed as well. So.
And that same list is on a bag. Grab one of these from ACBC.
Perfect.
And they're at the welcome desk.
They're at the welcome desk. So.
I just read something that besides canned goods, this woman had talked to people who were going to the food shop. They also needed some of them don't have can openers.
Yeah.
So, figuring that out and providing those kinds of things. And truly sanitary products are critical.
And diapers and stuff like that too. Yep. Absolutely. Well, thank you for being here this morning.
This was awesome.
Thank you.